7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Invite everyone to please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call the roll, please.
Jim Daniels.
Here.
Steve Nelson.
Here.
Dan Tyler.
Here.
Lynn Daisy. Here. Michael DeVito.
Here.
Eric Jones. Kristen Rich. Here.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda as proposed? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed? Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Same sign. Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as proposed? So moved. Second. Moved and seconded. Roll call.
DeVito.
Yes.
Jim.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Lynn. Yes. Tyler.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Jonathan.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Audience to visitors. Is there anyone in the audience this evening who would like to address the board?
I would.
Okay.
Where would you like me to stand?
Sort of in the middle there, right there.
On a social distance. All right.
That's a good mark.
Perfect. Good. Well, good evening. My name is Barb White, 311 Plymouth Court. I've lived in Sycamore for over 30 years, and I taught in District 427 for 25 years. I was a member of the Sycamore Education Association. Jim, I worked with your wife and daughter. I taught both of your daughters. Lee, you were my colleague for years, and I worked with your son, and before that, he was also one of my students. Chris, I taught your kids. Michael, you were my student. Steve, your daughter was in my class. Steve, your wife, your son, also people I know. James and Eric, I'm sure I've somehow interacted with your circles. Why? Because that's how Sycamore is. It's a community that knows and commits to each other. And it's time to do that again. I resigned as a Sycamore teacher in August, but as a member of our community and an advocate for education, I want to encourage the board to settle a contract with the Sycamore teachers as soon as possible. The union or association isn't just metonymy. It's not a nameless entity. It's a team of committed educators who are trained, licensed, and learning professionals. The association is made of teachers who continue to go above and beyond what is required. Why? Because they're teachers. They don't just teach content, they teach kids, Sycamore kids. Board members, Sycamore teachers don't just work for you, they work with you for the benefit of students. So what is the holdout and what else has to happen for them to prove their value? Beyond the regular teacher things, like planning, grading, collaborating, and teaching, Sycamore teachers are standing in the gaps you might forget exist. Encouraging struggling students, coaching sports so students can have balance and experiences, sponsoring clubs so leadership and communication skills develop, writing letters of recommendation, reteaching behavior protocols so students can be well-rounded, meeting with parents outside of contract hours, checking and responding to emails late at night so students and parents are at ease, pivoting and persevering through COVID, and you know the list goes on. Our students have seen a lot of immature and inappropriate behavior by adults in the past 18 months. Let's avoid more of that and model cooperation, communicate value, and reclaim that sense of community by swiftly settling a fair contract. That would be the Spartan way, and that's how we can truly empower all students to succeed in their world. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board this evening?
My name is Kelly Nestling. I live at 1709 Cedar Brook Court. About 4 years ago, I sold my family a home in Geneva. I spent a lot of time researching school districts of where my children would get an excellent education. I chose Sycamore and bought a house here. I look back and decided this is probably one of my largest regrets in my life, of enrolling my children in the school district. The way things have been handled throughout the school year and last year, I am disgusted and disappointed. The teachers not having a contract, they deserve it. They deserve everything they do. I work the front lines with COVID, and these teachers are working the front lines with our children. The political agenda that's being pushed upon our children is unacceptable. The lack of confidence that I have in our superintendent doesn't even hold a candle to what Mrs. Countryman was. She was amazing. But let's talk about this incident last week with my son. On 11/15, my son went to the doctor, was treated, diagnosed, and was told he could return to school 24 hours after his antibiotic. I informed the principal it is not COVID. It is not COVID related, and it has no COVID symptoms. He would not be tested and would be returning to school at 10:30 in the morning, 24 hours after his antibiotic, per his doctor. I was pressed for a diagnosis, and I was told no. I will not give a diagnosis, as it is my son's personal medical history, and I don't have to release it. The principal repeated, understood what I said, and when I dropped him off at 10:30 with a cleared note from his medical doctor, I was told he could not return to school without a diagnosis. I again reiterated that I will not give a diagnosis, and that's my son's private medical history. Again, it is not COVID related. I was harassed with multiple phone calls. I reached out to Mr. Wilder's office, about 6 phone calls, which I never got a phone call back. I then received a phone call or an email later that day from the school district nurse that says I do not have to give a diagnosis, but they want to know the symptoms, which I made very clear in the multiple phone calls. It was not COVID related. Why I was harassed for these diagnosis is unbeknownst to me, but it's unacceptable. My son was allowed to go back to school after sitting in the vestibule at West Elementary for about 1.5 hours in an unsecured part of the building. How is that acceptable for a 10-year-old? How is it acceptable for someone to tell my son it's not his fault because mom won't give the school his diagnosis? A 10-year-old should not be brought into that. Your job is to educate my child. I will do his medical business on my own. Another phone call with them, I said that this was an ear infection or an ankle, would I need a COVID test? I was told no. I ended up telling him it was a bacterial infection to get my son into class. Talking to Mr. Wilder on the phone, all he told me was you need to tell him the symptoms. I don't know how to be more clear when I said no COVID symptoms. Seems pretty clear and abundant to me. It's not related to COVID when I have a doctor's note. He was unempathetic. He had no interest in talking to me. He had no interest in returning my phone call. I have talked to Mr. Wilder on multiple occasions and have gotten very few responses, and I find it unacceptable. My next thing I'd like to say is ISBE has already said they won't hold recognition status for schools who do not follow the mask mandate. It is a mandate, it's not a law. Why are we continuing this? Attorney DeBoer from downstate has said he will represent the school districts so we can get rid of these masking. Make it optional for the parents, for our children, for us to parent our children while you educate. I expect the board to give the teachers a contract, give parents a choice to parent our children, and move on with this. I also urge the board to re-examine the need of Mr. Wilder. Address his contract. Ask for his resignation or termination if nothing is going to be done. Laws aren't being followed, teachers are upset and leaving, and parents are ready to leave and pull out of this district. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to address the board this evening? Okay, we'll move on then to the next item. Communications, correspondence, informational items. Letters and newsletters. Got several. FOIA requests. There's one. We'll respond to. Committee reports. Triple I.
Triple I was the biggest thing last week.
Suspension report. There was one. Vaping is still a big issue, it seems. Spartan Awards, middle school cross country team.
Good evening. Our cross country team had a very good season this year, and tonight we'd like to celebrate. I'm going to introduce the coaches, let them come in and tell you the specifics of the season, and introduce the kids. So our coaches are Ben Doty, Jill Anderson, and Justin Haynes. If you come up. Would you like to tell them the specifics of the season?
Yeah, I'd love it. I'd love to. This has been one of the highlights of my, not just my year, but my career, is getting to coach some of these kids. A little history on Sycamore Middle School cross country. I've coached for probably 7 years, and we've never taken a team downstate in that time, and this year we got to take an entire boys team downstate and an individual female, which we'll recognize them in just a minute. The last time we took a team downstate was, I think, 2009. Coach Doty couldn't be here tonight, was a part of that team. I think it was his first year coaching the team. And the last time we took an individual prior to this year was 2016 when Jack Campier made state. It's incredibly hard. We always comment and kind of are challenged when we're in one of the toughest sectionals in the state. This year our boys team took third in that sectional, qualifying them as a team. They ran outstanding times, PRs. And the coolest thing about it for me was we did it with a lot of 6th graders and 7th graders this year. Last year, during COVID, we were blessed enough to have a season, and we actually won our sectional that year, and we're kind of defeated with the fact we couldn't take that team to state because there was no state due to COVID. Fortunately, these guys stepped up, and we got to do it this year, so it was a lot of fun. So, do we want to introduce these guys?
Sure.
Cool. Coach
Sure.
Anderson will do that.
Yeah. Starting with Liam Berry, 8th grade. Luke Miller. Aiden McAdams, 6th grader. Logan Jones, 8th grade. Drake Crittenden, 7th grade. Riker Rissman, All-State, 6th grade. And Layla Janish, 8th grade.
You guys deserve these as well.
Thank you for recognizing us.
The next item then would be Assistant Superintendent for Business.
I guess I don't want to listen to my TIF presentation, so. No, so tonight, just wanted to give the board an update, pass along some information from the city of Sycamore and what our TIF redevelopment project is, what they're looking at from the city's perspective. So just to give a little background on what a TIF is, it's a tax increment finance. And so what that does is it looks at a proposed area in your town and looking to generate some investments into that area of the town to raise the EAV. So they do a lot of studies in those areas at buildings or residential homes that are maybe deteriorating or dilapidated, things of that nature. And so really trying to bring up that EAV and look at long-term growth within our community. So Sycamore had one TIF zone right around the Blooming Gardens area. A regular TIF runs for 23 years. But they were able to close out that TIF 2 years early, which I learned doesn't typically happen, but they had completed all the projects that they were looking to do, and so they actually closed out that TIF earlier than they anticipated. So with that, the city started working with a third-party company, looking at other areas in Sycamore that they could start another TIF with. And so they're looking at the area around North Avenue and Page Street, specifically between the FS Grain Facility and North Cross Street. So I've got the map up there so you guys can see the area that they're looking at. So this consists of about 56 acres, 39 parcels of property. And so with that, they're looking at commercial, vacant, industrial, and a few residential properties along that area. So again, there's severe dilapidation around that area. They're looking at a significant investment needed to bring that kind of up to what they're hoping it to look like. So currently, there is an individual who has already put about $2.1 million of his own money into that area. He's done some tuck pointing currently and some roofing. And what they're looking at, they're going to have a couple different sections in there. Darby Dwyer, who I think most of you are probably familiar with, she's going to have a marketing area in that. They're looking to have an artist in there, a restaurant, a whiskey distillery, and then a flea market / art area. So that's what they're hoping for.
In the old FS area you're talking about?
Yep. So the budget of the TIF is about $6.2 million. And then, so what they look at with the TIF is your current EAB. So it's about $2.7 million right now. That EAB will hold while the TIF is in place. So we will continue collecting money on that $2.7 million. Now the purpose, again, like I stated, is for the EAB to grow. They are looking at EAB to go up to about $9 million in that area when it's all said and done. We won't see any of that additional EAB until the TIF has expired or they decide to close it early again if they do. And then all that money comes on to the taxes. So then we would start collecting EAB on top of that. So that's kind of what they're looking at right now. Last night, the city of Sycamore held a hearing, a public hearing, to look at this redevelopment project. And then I think they hope to take this to the board for a vote in early 2022. So, and then once that happens, then we'll start the process. So that's kind of an update on that area. I think it's great for our community, and especially that they've got someone who's already put so much of his own money into it already. So I think it'll look great when they're all said and done. So that's just an update on that.
And how long does the TIF run?
23 years.
23 years?
Mm-hmm.
You'll still be here. Does this, if I'm reading it right, is that our building in the one corner there? Or does it go around?
No, I think it's a block.
Oh, our warehouse?
Block off of it.
Is that what you're,
Yeah, the
Okay.
one.
All right.
yeah.
I don't think ever short.
Yeah, so it is a large area when you look at it all. That goes way back to off of Brookville here, so.
What's the draw to closing the TIF out early?
What's the what?
What would be like the draw to closing the TIF out early?
I think because they had completed everything, so to get the money back on the tax rolls, there was no sense in keeping that EAB flat at where it had been 21 years ago, so. So that's all I have for that, just an update, and if I learn any more information, I can share that with you guys, but it looks like the city council will pass that and they'll move forward with it.
So that will impact us next year on taxes? It doesn't impact us at all, really.
It doesn't impact us because we'll continue.
We just don't capture any.
We don't capture any new EAV until it comes back on it, so.
Anything else on the tip? Thank you. Assistant Superintendent for HR, Education Programs Report.
Tonight we have Dr. Chris Webster to present, give us a little update on the Learning and Teaching Department and talk about data that was or was not available during COVID. So.
Yeah, this is the hot spot right here.
Yeah.
Wherever you want, you're on the hot spot no matter
All right,
where.
I'm going to stay on the hall, no, I'm kidding. It's really great to see you. Happy upcoming Thanksgiving. I wish you grateful for all the work that you do. Typically, thank you. Typically, I come speak to you right before Halloween because our school report card is typically released at the end of October. And they did release portions of the school report card in October, but they did not release any data. So the data, limited data for our school report card is set to be released on December 2nd. So I wanted to share with the board what to anticipate. You can, like I always do in October, it's in November this time. But what you can anticipate and what you can expect not to anticipate on the upcoming school report card. So just to give you a little context, we didn't test at all in 2020, the spring of 20 because of COVID. And then the spring of 21, we were required to test with IAR and SAT, but it was done a bit differently. School districts were given the option of testing either in the spring of last year or the fall of this year. So if the districts that chose the fall of this year, like for example, if we chose to test in the spring, but there are districts that chose to test in the fall. For those districts, for example, their third grade students from last year would take their third grade state testing in the fall, and then they would test again in the spring for their current fourth grade. We did not think that was the most advantageous for our students. We figured once a year was plenty. And it was tricky. It was really hard last year trying, because we were not even full-time, we were hybrid. There were a lot of challenges to getting the testing done. The testing environment, I'll tell you, was not ideal. But we did get the testing done last year. But because there were districts in the state that chose to test in the fall, which was their choice, we don't have any state data. So the districts that tested in the spring, we have our data that's coming out the second. The people that tested in the fall won't come out until early winter. And so they don't have aggregate state data for us to be able to see how we did in comparison to the state. So all we have is our data, but we're kind of siloed because we don't have anything to compare it to. And in this climate, it's super important to have our comparison data so we can see, is this what we expect to see across the state? So I pulled some, in my report, I pulled some scores from 2019 just to give us our own context, some local context of kind of where we were. From the different districts, this is the informal conversation I've had with districts across Kane, DuPage, and DeKalb. Everybody's saying about the same thing. I feel like we're pretty in line with what I feel like we're going to be pretty in line with what we see in the state. So I wanted to give you that context that right now we have our local data. But in April, the school report card will be released a third time, and then it will have the context of the current year's data, and we will already have finished testing for this year, for next year's data. So we won't have the state data for last year until we've completed testing for this year. So again, because of COVID and the different way they had to do things. I also did want to give you a heads up that there is talk at the state board, a serious conversation at the state board about changing the state test again. That conversation has been happening just prior to COVID. It started when the previous contract with our vendor, the state vendor, expired. There was some conversation about making changes then. They did not. They are talking again about making those changes. They're talking about the state test happening 3 times a year, but only for an hour or less each time. So there are changes coming. The test is going to change again, estimated in about 2 years. So I will keep you on top of that. There's just, the rumblings are just starting, the conversations are just starting, they're starting the hearings and those sorts of things. So I will keep you on top of that to let you know the changes that are coming. But that obviously has an impact on our longitudinal data and all sorts of things. So anyway, so that's kind of a little bit of a catch-up lesson on where we've been in the post, hopefully, post-COVID world with IAR and SAT. So if you could advance the next slide, please. Okay, so the report card data will be published at noon on Thursday, December 2nd. Mark your calendar. It will be reported through the Illinois School Report Card website. I did include it in this link, in this PowerPoint presentation for you, so you can click right on it. Final state comparison data will not be available until April of '22. The new data qualifiers, they're similar to what we had last year. So a lot of the data will be reported as either unavailable due to COVID or possible data impact, used with caution. All of our data is used with caution because there were so many factors that influenced testing in general. And when we do get the state data, it's going to be super hard to compare kids who took a test in March of last year and kids who took a test in October of this year, and even the learning that they were exposed to. So I mean, it just alters all sorts of things. So summative designations were not calculated. This will be the second year in a row that some summative designations were not calculated. We will maintain the same designations we had prior to COVID, and all of our schools were commendable at that time. We currently do not have any information on our Illinois Science Assessment. We took that also last spring. We will not have those scores until April. Again, right about the time we're taking the next round. There is no growth percentile. There's no way to show growth with IAR because we don't have any comparison data because we missed 2020. So that kind of reset that clock, so they can't compare to a kind of a null year if you look at it that way. Access is for our EL students and their progress towards proficiency, and those scores will also be released in April. Those are all the things that we should use with caution. Absenteeism obviously was odd last year. Truancy, dropout rate, all of those things on there were impacted potentially with COVID and should be interpreted with caution. And then, okay, so kind of hard to see. I wish I could blow that screen up. So if you look at the bar, obviously red is our kids that aren't meeting. And then the two middle are the approaching, and then green is making it, is meeting, and then the blue is exceeding. So that top bar shows our progress across the district. That would be 3 through 8. Last year in reading. We don't have any comparison data from 2020, but I wanted to provide some context for you. So if you look at the bottom part of that chart, thanks Steve, that top bar shows what our performance was in 2019, and the bottom bar shows what the state's performance was in 2019. So if you look at our current performance in 2021 mid-pandemic, and the state in 2019, we're still performing at or near the state level. Now, that is certainly not something that in a typical time I would celebrate in any way, shape, or form. I think it indicates that there was absolutely a disruption. But as far as there being a loss, or as far as there being some irrecoverable loss that happened, we're not showing it there. We're also not showing it in our map data. So we are showing that there's room for us to improve. We show that there was a disruption to learning, but we're also showing that we believe, actually in January, we believe we're already going to see a pretty steady increase because kids are in school every day, and that is an intervention. Yes, sir?
So how does our map data correlate with this?
Well, I will be back in February. So the reason I say that is because we tested in the fall, but we have our next benchmark window is in December. And so I'm going to come back in February and I'm going to show you where we were in the fall and where we were in December, so you can start to see how we're then coming up and out so far this year. And then like I always do in June, I'll come back and I'll show you where we ended up. So we showed across the district there were areas that were more impacted than others. Our younger students were more impacted, but they're also closing the gap faster as we move forward. And we actually had a couple grade levels, believe it or not, that showed improvement because of our really clear focus. We actually had a grade level that performed better after COVID than prior to COVID because of the very intentional focus that we had on just keeping it really tight, right? So I'll have more to show you, and when I do that, here's a cliffhanger for you, I'll be showing it to you on some Tribe Lab dashboards. So we can start to see how those look. So I'm hopeful, like I said, we'll start testing actually the 1st of December, which is amazingly like when we come back like from Thanksgiving. Right. I mean, it's like right around the corner. And then we'll wrap that up prior to winter break. And so I'll have that for us in January. Okay? So this is just for ELA. And, I'm sorry, yes.
Before you move forward, Doctor,
Of course.
could you expand on your statement that it didn't look like we had a major slide or that there was a significant portion that was not meeting expectations? Because just looking at the numbers, and I can pull them up, obviously you guys can't see. But I show the number that like did not meet went from 9% to 17, so it
Right.
almost doubled. And the number that were proficient went from 44 to 31. I mean, those seem like pretty significant slides to me. I'm just wondering what your statement meant that we didn't see anything substantial, or I guess what would it take for us to be concerned?
So thank you for asking that question so I can clarify. I would not in any way, shape, or form, again, say that these are scores that we celebrate, right? We did see an impact. I mean, it shows there we did see an impact. When you look at 2019, you look at 2021, we did see an impact. So if I did say in some way that we didn't see an impact, that was not my intention. What the impact, my intention was, is that the impact that we did see while it was there was not irrecoverable, was not where kids literally completely just fell off the cliff. Now, were there certain kids that obviously this was a very difficult time for? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's not to diminish their experience. What I'm saying is that overall, as a district, we did see an impact from COVID. But if you kind of flash back to some of the news, the things that we heard in the news, or the things that were predicted to happen, it isn't quite to the extent, thankfully, that was as deep of a decline as was predicted to happen. Now, I will show you math. We did have a larger drop in math, as did the rest of the country. It was interesting. That is where the largest impact was felt. That is what was predicted to be felt. And again, I will tell you this is district data, and so it's going to look different depending on the kind of ebbs and flows.
And that leads me to my next question. I know it wasn't presented in here and probably won't be presented tonight, but maybe looking forward to February. We're all kind of being subjected to the global social experiment here, and so trying to understand, as we look forward to how education may change, looking at cohorts and understanding who didn't lose as much in remote learning. I mean, I would expect to see that maybe the elementary schools didn't suffer as much because they were at least in hybrid the whole year, whereas middle school and high school weren't for half the year. Maybe would expect certain high achievers to not, who maybe are more self-motivated at home and don't need as much, constant attention and interaction to succeed. I mean, those are the sorts of groups that it would help us to understand, and I'm sure somebody outside of our district is going to be looking at this on a global scale as well. But what can we take away from that as we look forward to possible remote education days at some point? I know not the snow day thing, but how can we learn from this lesson and
one of the things that we've learned just from our own local data and that is supported more broadly in some of the research I've been doing about the impact of COVID on kids is that one of the groups that has been really suffered probably the most significant impact has been our families of lower socioeconomic background. That was the case prior to COVID, and it was exacerbated during COVID. In fact, in my learning and teaching goals, I have a goal that's specific for that particular population of our district, because of all of the different ways that I kind of looked and disaggregated the data consistently. That was a factor that kind of surpassed every other factor, and so that would be an area and there would be lots of different reasons for that, opportunities and all sorts of different reasons. So that's an area that I'm already focusing on and would suggest we continue to focus on, and a group that I'm watching closely to see how the return to education helps, right? How will this back? So I think knowing where we started in the fall is really important, but then knowing the impact of our instruction through winter will help us know then, as we start to kind of remediate that lack of time in school, that'll help us kind of decipher where are the true areas that need direct attention, because if you were to look in the fall, it would look like they all did, right? But just the intervention of school helps us kind of delineate where now the kids are back in school, they're in the routine, they're closing those gaps pretty quickly, because kids are resilient. Where are the places that remain that are going to need that extra deep dive?
Just to build on your point and what you were addressing with Eric,
and for the public's sake maybe too, we were discussing this 5Lab software that you kind of had referred to early on in the year.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what I'm just wondering is the 5Lab software going to give us, you, building level, and teachers data that's going to support the MTSS program that we've recently put in place with the ESSER funds to address the inequitable, like we were talking about the equity dip from COVID? Are we going to be able to, do you expect that we'll be able to see that
Yes.
effect in the next few months?
Yes.
And even in a public dashboard too, right?
Yes, I mean, and it'll be public at the next, I mean, I will have the dashboards to show at the next meeting. I've been working with Mr. Wilder, we've been discussing district goals and then the best dashboards that would match so that we could, public, and then working, I know I've mentioned Mr. Olson, then working on creating that public dashboard, talking to the board, seeing what we'd like to have out there. But even before it's on that public dashboard, it will be public here at this meeting. So that will be one tool, yes. That's a broad tool, so I would say, like, if you talk about the macro and the micro, right?
Right.
That will be a broad district tool about how we're doing, and that will help us. We're also looking at, through the MTSS process that you're referring to, at progress monitoring, because, and getting some very clear data and assessments in that area, so that, so the benchmark data kind of lets us know how we're doing in each of those three, fall, winter, spring. But we also want to know how we're doing in between fall and winter, and how we're doing in between winter and spring, so that we're not only reacting and we're being proactive, not reactive, right? So we're also working on, especially as we implement our new WIN program, we're looking at different progress monitoring tools that will give us that formative data in real time on a regular determined basis, so that we can monitor progress over between the two benchmarks. And that will be more at the micro level, individual kids. How are interventions working for kids? So that we can, like, after 6 weeks, if it's not working, if we're not seeing the growth we had anticipated, why, how do we change it up? So that we continue to see that growth by the next benchmark.
And I think you and we know, and I think it's important that the public knows too, that those ESSER funds have enabled us to roll out that MTSS program, and also to have what you've described as win time as a build-off of the data we're getting from the 5Lab software that we've invested in as a direct addressing of this dip from COVID in terms of just child success. And then so we've got that all mapped out, and we've got a plan that we're rolling out, and you're going to be able to interpret that data, but then the public will also be able to interpret that data with this 5Lab software. So that understanding is
That's correct. And as far as the ESSER funds and how the ESSER funds were used, I would completely defer to Nicole, because that is definitely, she is the expert, the ESSER expert. So I don't want to speak to how we allocated or didn't allocate money. But yes, to answer your question, that is the goal, and I think that is something that the other board members that, like Steve, I know, and Jim, Chris, that have been here for a while, that's something we've been talking about and wanting for a very long time. We have the capacity, now we just need the goals to attach the dashboards to. We need to know what we're measuring, so that we know what we're reporting. Mm-hmm. Right?
Right.
So yeah, does that answer your question?
No, it does. That's great, man. Hopefully it answers the public's questions too.
So yes, I wouldn't want, in any stretch of the imagination, I wouldn't want anybody to sense or to feel, so I appreciate, to go back to Eric's question, I appreciate his clarifying question. I wouldn't want anybody to feel like we're brushing this off in any way, or that we're saying that this is great news, or that this is something, oh, don't worry about it, it's going to fix itself. So that's not at all the message. The message is we obviously saw an impact, right? There was definitely a disruption. But as far as the significant learning loss and the kind of apocalyptic, edge of the cliff, we did not see that. And so we're grateful for that. And we're already, since the first day of school, intervening to move those scores forward. I mean, even just the testing environment here, those of you, I think, Eric and I are kind of like the data geeks here. So when you talk about a reliable testing environment, last spring was, kids were in school, they were out of school, they were in school, but then they were quarantined. We had kids, we couldn't test remotely, so that our participation rates are different. Even just, they weren't even used to being in school because they'd been out for a while and they had to take this test. And so these are not scores to celebrate, but even under all of that pressure and stress, they're not fantastic, but they're not absolutely like horrendous either.
And to reiterate for the public, this is also old data now.
It's way old data, this is from March.
And
Yeah.
anybody with a student in the district just went through parent-teacher conferences and got to go through math data for their own children and hopefully saw what
Yes.
you're describing, that we have made significant progress in the
Yes.
fall already. So I
Yes.
look forward to February more than this.
Yeah, and I figured you would. That was not gonna be my cliffhanger for today. It was gonna be my, like, but it's not, it's a spoiler alert. Now I just read my last slide. Oh well. So yeah, so I appreciate those clarifying questions so that I could, again, say, oh, we're not celebrating this data. We're working very hard to make sure that any disruption that happened is addressed. But we feel like, in a bad situation that we have, that we're in, this was a decent, we're gonna be okay. I guess that's the message, we're gonna be okay. Our kids are gonna be okay, we're gonna be okay, and our teachers are doing a fantastic job moving that needle. So,
This will come as no surprise, because every fall when you come to present to us, I always take issue with the state data, and I think your lead up to these slides, it's just riddled with
irregularities.
Right, like, I almost get angry that we're even looking at it. I realize that to turn a blind eye to it isn't really the thing either.
Exactly.
But I'm just not, I just don't put a lot of weight in this data. I'd rather wait and see the math data.
Which is why you'll see that my slides are brief, and it was for that specific reason. I think we need to be aware of our reality, and I wanted you not to be caught off guard. I wanted you to be prepared and informed when our data comes out, so that you have the context that you need to be able to answer any questions, and so that anybody who's a parent or a teacher has the context. The broader context of how this data fits. I mean, it is our data. It's going to be on our school report card, so I figured I wanted you to be familiar with it. With the caveat that I'll be back in February with district data that will actually measure our growth in real time this year from fall to winter. Like I said, our teachers have been working very hard. Our kids and families have been working very hard. We've already seen, just the things that I'm watching, we've already seen an upward trend. So,
is it something to look at when you come back, not only looking at from fall to winter, but also looking at spring of 2020?
we didn't have scores in 2020.
Okay.
We didn't have MAP or we didn't have MAP or IAR scores. We
So
missed.
the last map data we have is fall of 2020?
The last map data we
Winter?
have would be winter of 2019. Would have been December of 2019. And, yeah, which is, it's been a while. And it's hard to compare that data because it was a different world even at that point. So it does give us a context. I mean, I do have data from last spring. Last spring was our first map administration. So what I can do is I can show you growth from fall to winter, and then I can come back and show you fall to spring at the end of the year, and then I can show you spring to spring. Where were we in spring of 21? Where are we in spring of 22? So I can bring you that context as well.
Great.
If that would be helpful.
That'd be great.
Okay, so this is just reading, and this is just grades 3 through 8. So there's math. We are similar to the rest of the country that has saw a larger impact in math than reading. And if you look, again, that top bar is our progress as a district in math on IAR in grades 3 through 8, again, 3 through 8. And then down at the bottom, you see our district. So we had the most significant change that we had, I mean, we did have a significant more in red, but the partially met, which is the dark orange, is the part that seems to have grown the most. We also saw approaching. The other thing to remember is that prior to a couple of years ago, I don't know, everything is relative now because we've had like a pause button for a couple of years, but fairly recently, we went from a 4 ways that you could be measured to a 5. So back in not that long ago, you either didn't meet, there was 4. I think you didn't meet, you were approaching, you're almost there, you met, or you exceeded. So you had 2 ways to meet and 2 ways not to meet. Now we have 5. So you have 3 ways not to meet and 2 ways to meet, if that makes sense. So what they did is that middle column, like that approaching, that yellow, that goldenrod color, Once upon a time, not that long ago, right prior to COVID, probably a year or so prior to COVID, that would have been meeting. But the state changed the requirements of what was considered meeting. The other thing that I wanted to bring context to, so that you, as a reminder, because I know I've talked about this before, is that the state of Illinois has set a higher bar than the 50th percentile nationally. So typically, meeting would be meeting, would be like being average. Being in the 50th percentile or higher, typically above the 75th percentile would be considered exceeding, right? In a normal kind of distribution of things. The state of Illinois has set a higher bar. In order to even meet, you have to be, depending on the grade level, anywhere between the 60th and the 72nd percentile nationally to be considered meeting. And you have to be in the top 3 percentile nationally to be considered exceeding. So when you look at that context and then you look at this again, and you see the kids that are in the green and the kids that exceeded, we still had kids that were performing at or above the 60th percentile nationally, and we still had kids that were in the top 3 percentile nationally when compared to national norms. So, you know, data numbers are funny. You can talk about them all sorts of different ways. They can paint all sorts of kind of pictures. But it's important to kind of know how we're being, like what those numbers mean. So when you see those numbers, that doesn't mean that those kids that are in green are the 50th percentile. A lot of the kids, many of the kids in that yellow are average 50th percentile, between the 50th of that middle quartile performing students, but that is not considered mean by the state of Illinois. They've done the same thing for the SAT. The SAT, to meet proficiency standards in the state of Illinois, is a higher bar than the College Board sets for college, the projection of college success in their freshman year. The state of Illinois has set a higher target. So that's an important context to have. We are going to meet that. So we are not trying to shy away from meeting those targets. But again, that does shed a different light on the scores that are there. Any questions on the math score? Alrighty. Okay, so this is our SAT scores for ELA for last year, and the same distribution. So at the top is how we performed in 2021. We don't have a 2020 score. So I put in the 2019 score. So the top bar at the bottom, those bottom two bars, the top one is us in 2019, the bottom bar is the state. Even in 2021, in the middle of the pandemic, our kids outperformed the state. So at least it matched the state kind of at the top end. The bottom end, we had fewer kids that didn't meet than the state average in 2019. Again, I am not trying to sugarcoat this and say that this is something that we wouldn't expect more from our kids at a typical time, or that this is not an area that we're working on. Just pointing to the fact that while there was an impact, it wasn't like there was a tremendous loss. So that's for ELA, and that's for math. Again, you'll see, just like for 3 through 8, we did see a larger impact in math. We look more like the state in 2021 compared to 2019 than we look like ourselves. So again, not a celebration, absolutely not a celebration, but also not drastically different than what the state looked like prior to the pandemic. Now, we want to perform much higher than state levels, but when you look at a broader picture of going forward, the picture that paints is not to our standard, but not so far off that we just completely slid backwards, right? Okay, any questions on SAT?
How many kids take the PSAT?
All of them.
All of these
It's required.
for all 4 years?
No, first, 9th grade and 10th grade is PSAT, 11th grade is SAT. There's no testing involved. So just in the last couple of years, the PSAT was required as a state test. It seems like it wasn't that long ago, but it was, but because of COVID, but we didn't test during COVID, so it doesn't feel like it was that long, you know what I mean? So 9th and 10th graders take SAT. So the way we currently assess is that we have IAR and SAT scores, but locally, we use our map data currently. You know, we're always looking to make sure that that's the best tool. We use our map data currently from K through 8, And then in 8th grade, we transition into the PSAT for 9th and 10th as a predictor of the SAT in 11th. In 11, the PSAT is actually, as a district, that's an exit outcome. That is the culmination of their experience in Sycamore throughout.
There's no wavering about going back to ACT again, it's pretty much gonna stay SAT?
I don't hear any conversation at all at the state level about them changing anything at the high school. That sounds like the one place that sounds like it's gonna stay the same. 3 through 8 is gonna change, and I anticipate state testing coming to K2 in the not too distant future.
Do you have any idea of how many kids, as juniors or seniors, continue to take the ACT, even though they're required to take the SAT, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That would be a really good question for Tim, and I'm not gonna put him on the spot. And I don't know how much we would be able to tell with the last 2 years. Yeah, everything is kind of, it would be, but we can find out. We can ask the guidance office, we can find out.
I'm just interested to see if that's even happening.
Yeah, there are still kids that take the ACT. Okay, so this was the slide I was all excited about. So I'll be back in February. You get to look at me again in February. I will bring the fall data, the winter data, and then we can have a conversation about where we're at, have a better idea of where we've grown, and then that should really start to parse out what is just a lack of being in school and what were the actual disruptions. And I can speak to kind of what we've identified and how we're addressing those. Any other questions for me? Awesome, thank you for all you do. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your families and your friends.
Thanks, Chris.
Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Next item then is Superintendent's report.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start with our mission, empowering all learners to succeed in their world. Our vision is to provide an ideal learning experience where students and staff are engaged and want to come back the next day. Our core values, a couple of those are trustworthiness, equality, empathy, citizenship, and responsibility. And the five questions that our professional learning communities ask themselves and have discussions about it. I read these every meeting. I'm not going to read them tonight. You guys are familiar with them. That takes us to 7.01, which is resolution amending the property tax abatement qualifying criteria and definitions. So this really relates to the enterprise, the DeKalb County Enterprise Zone. That enterprise zone was created in 2016 with the municipalities within the county. The district signed on in 2018. The enterprise zone promotes economic development in the county, which in turn benefits communities throughout our county. Interesting that we're talking about the enterprise zone, and Mrs. Stucker talked about the TIF district. They both kind of have, the end result is to increase the economy overall in the long term. 2020, the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity approved amendments and corrections to the enterprise zone here in DeKalb County. As a result of unforeseen factors that have occurred or come up since 2014. So therefore, the DeKalb County Economic Development Corporation is proposing changes to that enterprise zone agreement and to expand the qualifying projects in the enterprise zone. So what they need is to share this with all the taxing bodies within DeKalb County, the municipalities, the school districts, any public libraries that issue taxes. Now that they've made these changes, they need to get these out to taxing bodies for consideration. So just to be clear, tonight, not asking for any action. These are shared with me by the director of the DCEDC. So I'll go through what the changes are. I believe these are part of the board packets, so they're available to the public as well. Then we'll revisit these in December for further consideration and approval. So there were really 5 areas where the enterprise zone agreement changed and things that were added. First of all, the changes enabled build-out, rehabilitation, and renovation of existing buildings. So that was not covered in the previous enterprise zone. We've seen a lot of that in DeKalb County, evidently, where older buildings were rehabbed. Those didn't qualify for the enterprise zone previously. So now that the DCEDC is recommending to add those, that they are qualifying. Enabling data centers to be defined as knowledge-based industry uses. The easiest example here is Facebook coming up and being constructed on the south side of the county. It would not have qualified, it would qualify now. There's still a process where those entities would need to apply to receive the tax incentives. It's not just automatic. These changes would allow them to qualify, and then they would need to go through the application and approval process. One of the other changes was modifying job creation requirements for those knowledge-based industry projects. I believe the previous agreement had one position for every 250 square feet. The new one has one position for every 350 square feet, so it changes that requirement. The Facebook data center is enormous, so there's a lot of square footage there that I'm sure that had some bearing. One of the other changes is extending the job creation performance period for speculative development. So previously, if I remember correctly, I had to bring my notes just to be sure. I want to make sure that I get this right. The requirement was that there were job creation performance requirements in a 2-year period. Now they're extending that to 4 years. So giving businesses a little bit more time to develop those jobs. And then lastly, they're adjusting minimum wage requirements to meet the state requirements. So minimum wages have changed since 2014. This new agreement covers that. So again, the agreement is included in the board packet for review. Our attorneys have looked at it. They're okay with it. They did recommend one change, which the DCEDC did approve. So they were okay with us adding that. No action is recommended this evening, just first reading, and then we'll, like I said, revisit it again in December. Are there any questions right now?
I have several questions and several comments and just a whole lot of concern about this. I don't know if you want to take these now, or you want me to send them to you, or what?
So I am unlikely to be able to answer those questions, just because these changes were proposed by the DCEDC. It might be easier if Mr. Dunbeck or anybody has questions to email those to me. I can forward those to Mr. Borak. Get those reviewed.
I'll just in a general sense point out what I have rather than expect an answer. But one of the first things I see is that this is retrospective. Goes back to December 1st, 2020, and I just wondered why that was.
I assumed that was a typo, but yeah.
And now we're adding construction or redesign of existing structures involving interior build-out, renovation, or rehabilitation. And there's no definition of any of those terms. So I think it just leads one to believe there's going to be controversy over what constitutes these things unless we define them in the agreement. The other thing is, I don't believe this is going to apply to Facebook because they're in the interstate competition market zone. So this won't apply to them.
Could you say that one more time, Jim, just so they're in the
interstate market competition zone? Interstate competition market area. That's what it's called in the agreement. I'm particularly interested in the change in definitions or what constitutes a build-out versus an expansion, because we use both terms in this agreement. I noticed in the agreement something that was very interesting to me, which is that the administrator of the enterprise zone is supposed to be getting tax abatement reports and going over those, and I don't recall ever seeing any of those. It would be very nice to have those reports sent to us, and hopefully they're somewhat like that one kind of publicity statement they included with the materials that said, oh, well, this place is opening and that place is opening. You know, so we can see each project and what the impact really is on the community. Because it's kind of hard to figure out whether the cost of the abatement really is worth the, you know, what we get back in the community.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see that. I'm almost done. I see that if you're in a TIF group and a TIF zone, then you don't qualify for this. So our new buildings that are going to go into our new TIF are not going to qualify. So those are my biggest and basic questions.
What I'd like to do is I'll take these and then any other questions that you guys send me, run those by Mr. Borak and get responses. I'd rather not bring this back to the board for a second reading. So I've got those answers, share them with you and give me your thoughts on whether you're ready to see
I would have the same questions anyway.
Yeah.
I didn't get them answered
Yeah,
before this.
absolutely. It doesn't make any sense to do that.
I think the definitions is probably one of the most important in there because we don't want to get into a similar situation like we've had to deal with that we're about to find out
Yes.
what different spaces were and what we can
constitutes
collect or
certain
not collect.
definitions.
Yeah.
I think if they're not defined in there, that's going to be the same problem over again. We don't want to repeat that, even though we had no control over the fees.
Yeah.
Have there been any projects that affect Sycamore as part of this economic development zone, or that you're aware of?
They've not communicated anything to us.
I wouldn't think so, because if I recall that agreement, we have to approve, like there are different abatement methods.
Well, there was one that they said that they want to grandfather in. It's the old Anaconda.
There would be a new one. There haven't been any up to this point, but there is one that would, I believe, qualify if the changes are approved.
Yeah, I think that's been my concern all along, is it seems like a lot of work for the development that's not really being focused on our area.
It's all in the corridor.
There's maybe not a lot of harm in being a part of it, but I also don't see
I
how.
think it's mostly developed.
Yeah, right.
If any of the other board members have questions that you'd like me to answer, let me know. Shoot me an email. I'll add those to the list and be glad to follow up with the board. Any other questions about 7.01? I'm not going to read that over again. Okay. I'm going to move on to 7.02, which is the 22-23 district calendar. This was originally on here for second reading and approval this evening. I think Eric referenced earlier, or maybe it was Michael, I can't remember, the change from e-learning to snow days. And that change raised some questions within the district, so I would just ask if we would maybe consider reviewing the dates of the 22-23 calendar one more time prior to approval with that change and what the impact is going to be. So my recommendation tonight is that we table that for this evening. I'll review those dates and then come back to the board in December, hopefully with a final calendar for approval.
Well, rather than table it, I think we should postpone it. There's a difference.
Yeah, there is, and I'm fine with that.
Okay. So is there a motion to postpone the second reading of the district calendar?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Sounds good. Sorry to pull that at the last minute. The change with snow days was kind of last minute as well, so just trying to make sure that we do our due diligence before it comes to the board. And that is the superintendent's report.
Open discussion, issues, observations, questions? Future agenda items?
I mean, I can provide a quick recap of some of the III stuff that I'm part of. Maybe Steve can chime in on what's in the resolutions.
I'd love to hear, yeah, we got a letter from IS.
Yeah, you got that.
Summarizing.
Friday night was really good. There was a presentation from a teacher out of Pacific Northwest. He's a fourth grade teacher, became a social media phenomenon. Works at a school that's 97% Title I. And thanks to some of the flexibility he was able to work out with his administration, they allowed him to start using kind of social media to promote some things going on in his classroom. And so he's talking really about how that has benefited him, having that flexibility with administration to be able to kind of individualize the way teachers teach, so not just looking at individualizing delivery of curriculum to students, but individualizing how teachers are allowed to deliver curriculum themselves. And how he was able to do a lot of exciting things that got him eventually on the Ellen DeGeneres show, and some other things where he was able to get tens of thousands of dollars being donated by companies to help them out there and to create some unique opportunities for students. So pretty inspiring talk from him. Went to several sessions that were mostly focused on superintendent evaluation and district goal setting. So I'll provide some thoughts on that. They had some interesting programs that I think could probably help us as far as going through that process every year. I know we, especially as we bring on new board members, trying to figure out how to perform an evaluation and kind of seeing how structure around like evaluating staff has been formalized. This entity created something similar for evaluating not superintendents, but it can also be used as a tool by principals or by superintendents evaluating principals and others. But they've actually developed a robust rubric, so you're not just looking at something and saying, I feel like it's a 3 today or a 4 or 5. Like there's actually criteria that says these things are met and you would score it this way. And
SMART goals.
yeah, well, the exciting thing was seeing they had several districts up there that were talking about having just implemented this, and that both from the superintendent side as well as from the board president or board member side. But it's a web-based tool, so it's a living document throughout the whole year. The superintendent can say, well, these were the goals I was given, and so for that goal, here's an example. Maybe it was a communications goal, and they can upload, here are articles that got sent to the news, and here's a web blast we did, and here's a podcast. They can be adding that stuff throughout the year, so when you sit down to do reviews, you at home can be sitting, going through this list and going, oh, here's all the supporting documentation. I can now provide my evaluation, and then you get together and everybody can see up on the website how every other board member scored it, how the superintendent scored themselves, and kind of come to a good outcome, a robust outcome out of that. So I liked that. I sent Jim some information, thought maybe we could get a presentation from him just to see if it's a tool we'd be interested in adopting. Obviously there'd be some cost to it, but it was really compelling. And then the goal setting one was good. They talked about kind of with the SMART goal thing, but talking about end goals versus means goals. So where do we want to be in 3 years? Now, how do we set up the goal for this year, and next year, and the year after that? It's going to get us towards that that end goal. That's something that I've always been wanting to see. I think one of the things we looked at specifically hiring Mr. Wilder was the goals and the very data-oriented approach that the previous district had taken and being able to track that. So that's something that I found very interesting. That was most of it. I did sit in on the legislative update. They had a couple of senators and
I heard that was very disappointing.
State senators. I mean, they all said the right things, right? We support education and we support lifting mandates and local control and blah, blah, blah. Whether we'll actually see any of that come to fruition, remains to be seen. There were questions about what the bill back, right?
Policy around.
There were questions about what
From the legislature, a little gift.
What the Build Back Better funds, how would that be allocated? Is there going to be more money made available for districts to do building renovations and improvements, vertical infrastructure? And it's too early for them to have any take on that. They are still committed to their $350 million or whatever goes into the UBF funding. They're not touching that, but obviously still making a lot of poor financial decisions in other places. So we'll see. That was most of what I said.
I'm glad you mentioned, the infrastructure bill and Build Back Better, because I was just amazed by the Luder report on how much money is actually out there. And I hope we can position ourselves so that we can take advantage of that. I see other districts that seem to prepare for these things and kind of pounce on them right away, and they get more than their fair share sometimes.
Well, and they did mention, one district pointed out that I guess there's a couple of different processes how some of these funds get allocated or at least get claimed, and in some case it takes like a full-time dedicated grant writer because of the amount of paperwork that has to be filed at the beginning and at the end to justify it if it goes through a federal program versus some of the other state incentive programs. And I don't remember the names of those programs off the top of my head. There's a request that they make this easier because districts are typically understaffed and don't have a full-time person. The smaller districts that could use that money don't have dedicated people that can spend that much time. I raised a question about the ESSER funds and mentioned how I wasn't able to make heads or tails out of how we got allocated as few funds as we did versus every other district in our county. If you'll recall, I mentioned that, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, because I looked through the numbers and I've been talking to our state rep about, well, how did they come up with this? Because if you look at it on a dollar per pupil standpoint, I mean, we got something like 1/5 of what DeKalb got per student. And I was kind of told a couple of different things. Well, it had to do something with your Title I allocation or your ratio of low-income students. So I took all that data off Illinois report card. It did not matter what factors I used to sort data. Sycamore got the short end of the stick versus every other district in our county by large amounts. And so I raised that issue and at least asked for transparency. And their response to me, which I haven't had a chance to talk to anybody in the administration about yet, pointed to that and said that those funds were not just decided at the state level, that it actually had to do with the districts applying for that money, and that it's something about the application process that determined how the money was allocated. I haven't been able to corroborate that with anyone, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you, Nicole, about it yet, so I just kind of threw my hands up and said, no.
No, that would be news to us.
Because it came out as a spreadsheet, right, before anybody even made a request. We got to listen to the application.
They told us.
They told us. Rockford got 200 million.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. When I look at that, I just can't understand how all these districts around us get so much more than we do. It's not fair. So I'd like to be on top of this as much as we can so that we can try to take advantage of it. And whatever little advantage we can take, we should take it. We need the money.
Right, well, we always find ourselves in a difficult position. We don't get the funding because the state says that we're better off, we're too affluent compared to DeKalb. Almost, 70-some% of our tax base is residential, so we don't get the commercial development and enterprise development that DeKalb's get. It's like we just can't win.
Right.
So along those lines, part of our agreement when we partnered with SEF, with Lauren, is that she would help us on these duties. So I think we certainly can call on her to help us with grant writing, paperwork follow-up and stuff. I'm sure if there were significant dollars at risk, that's no different than raising money from SEF, going to school district. So I think would be the use of retirement, it would be to approach her about that as part of our agreement. She can help with those things. Resolution-wise, you should have all gotten an email that kind of summarized everything. The vote on, and I won't even call it the gun bill because I see it as a local control bill. Right. But it was close. It was 53% against and 47% for. And even on the floor of the delegate assembly, there were people speaking in favor of it that I would not have heard speak in favor of it 3 years ago, she kind of got a dead year in there. But still did not pass. I'm sure it will come back, likely. Thank goodness there are 3 or 4 paying school board members that didn't make it to the floor because there was no appeal on the resolution committee to do not adopt, so they did not adopt those, didn't even discuss them. There was the one for increased literacy testing for new teachers. The teacher education did pass. Did pass. That was actually the first one discussed. The one regarding providing paid daycare for board members did not pass. Significantly did not pass. And then a lot of the other ones were, landscaping, and some of those passed, some of them were close, but the assembly was pretty close to 2019. In 2019, there were 419 delegates, which is one of the largest ones they had had in recent history. And we opened with, I believe, 411. Now, if you check all the votes, not all of them add up because some people choose not to vote for whatever reason, or left the room for a reason, like a restroom stop, and once you leave the room, you can't come back until that particular resolution's been voted on. You can't vote on it if you leave the room. So that explains why all the numbers don't always match up on every vote. But there were, we had 24 of them. Consent agenda, all the belief statements and such, all carried through. The 5 items that were on the consent agenda, 4 got pulled. And 3 of the 4 that were pulled, the person that pulled them never even got to vote. So I don't understand why they pulled them. But it took about 2.5 hours, a little bit longer than normal. But it was the first time we were digital, so no raising fans anymore. No bags with a fan in it. I didn't have to run up and down the aisles and count fans. It was an app on the phone, and/or there was a web link that you could go to and log into on an iPad or a phone or anything. It took about 35 minutes to get that rolling properly. But once it was going, it was quick and fast, and you saw immediately on the screen the results. Within probably 20 seconds of the vote closing, it would pop back up on the screen and it would say resolution failed, resolution passed, what the percentages and the total number of votes, yea or nay, were. So it was efficient once it got going. So I guess that's.
So just to be clear, those are just position statements.
They are. They're things that
they have nothing really more than
correct.
A way to establish a position for the members of the.
The intent is that that's the association's governance and lobbying will focus on those items, not others. And in the resolutions committee meeting on Friday morning in preparation for the delegate assembly, at the end of that time, the Camp Worth also said that this year they're going to be reevaluating the Constitution to see if it needs to be adjusted based on our brave new world. And the same thing for the resolution process. It won't change for this coming year because anything that would change would have to be voted on next November. But they're going to go this year. They're going to be going through it all and ask for all of our opinions throughout the year on how the process goes. Is there a way to maybe weed some of these out earlier or provide more opportunity for different things? Should the form be different? The process be any different? So they're top to bottom going to look at it and just, it hasn't been done for a long time. And they're doing the same with belief statements and things that some of them have been in there since the early 80s, probably outdated and need to be either dropped or revised. So doing a clean sweep of all of that stuff during this coming calendar year. So I think that's everything.
I sat in on an interesting series of lectures, but we also had a great keynote speaker, Gail Milu, who talked about unconscious bias on Sunday, and so and that was just discussing again in the schools and in a lot of the classrooms where unconscious bias can exist and some ways you can mitigate it through self-awareness. But something I found really helpful too, which I handed out, and I only had a few copies because I could only get my hands on a few copies, was Bloomingdale School District. Their board president and their superintendent were there, and they had some supplemental documents that they shared with everyone and have posted, and IASB apparently has now supported an electronic version of it. That's basically like a template handbook for new school board members that I thought was just really nifty. A lot of acronyms in here explained, a lot of, just how does authority.
Probably good for all of us.
And their words were, this could be, they had hoped that something like this could be a template document for other school districts, and it was wildly popular. Like I grabbed 4 of them, but I had to fight people for it. So I handed out, if you like, I have one extra one here. The other thing I sat in on, which was a packed room, and I had to fight my way into it, was the pension problem, which is not anything new that people don't know about, but some interesting things. We were at 42% funding goal, Illinois was, for TRS. Apparently, that goal is set to be at 95% of what it should be. That's what we're shooting to be at by 2043, or at least what the state would like it to be at. Indiana is at 80%. Wisconsin's at like 75%, so we're at 42%. And why that mattered and why it was a packed room was because we had a state board of education representative there giving this presentation, and it's looking like the state of Illinois is working hard to pass that obligation, or at least a portion of the TRS obligation onto the local level and finding a way to circumvent the referendum caps for local districts for property tax obligation. So there's a good chance in the next 5 to 7 years that it may be a component of the budget for our local districts, and somehow that will affect our local taxpayers pretty significantly. So, and then they're also talking about tier 3 forecasting for tier 3 TRS benefits, pushing retirement out over 70. So ideally they'll have you working until you're 90, but if we let them do this long enough. But a big push is also switching to like a lot of 403B style plans where districts are contributing to a 403B and maybe they move away from the defined benefit. But that seemed like there was a lot, at least in the group. I mean, when you started talking about that, there were people, I mean, one guy, I thought he was going to pick up a chair. It was a really, like, they were a rowdy group. And the guy who was talking to us, whose name, I think his name was Jamie, he's on the state board. He ended up having to be escorted out because of how, I don't want to use the word violent, but aggressive the group in that room was towards his, what he was saying. It was really a don't shoot the messenger situation, but yeah, it went about 45 minutes over time, so that's how much discussion there was on it. So yeah, that was interesting.
Wow.
And something to think about.
And you probably also saw the email that we're no longer members of the National School Board Association. It's essentially going to collapse, and rumor has it that all the groups that are pulling out are going to band together and start their own version of that. Is much more transparent than the old group, because we were state number 13, and there's at least another dozen that were already lining up to vote for this. So that is also happening. And since we're on it, I've had 4 meetings for the Inclusive American History Commission. 4th one was today. I sit on the resources group. Out of that 4 groups, there's resources, standards, professional development, and final report. We got a reprieve. We don't have to be done by the end of December. We have to be in February now, so that's still about, I think, 8 months short of being able to do it properly. I think Chris would probably agree with that. I've been in contact with Chris, and I just got a new spreadsheet that we've all the committees, resources, standards, and PD have agreed upon as to how we're going to track and tag things. So I will share that with you. I've also reached out to at least 5 other district curriculum directors so I can get input from varying areas and try and provide more value than just myself or our district. But our next big meeting is, we have a general meeting in December, but our next committee meeting is until January. So hopefully after the holidays, we'll have a bunch that we can dump into that and provide some good resources that will be vetted through the process. And right now, it's still targeted to be final report end of February, so that they can turn around and put it back on Chris and district in April to train everybody and implement a new social studies curriculum for next year.
So in this context, what does resources actually mean?
So, yeah, we've had quite a bit of discussion about that in debate. So what they're looking for us to put in there are things that districts either have been using, have found valuable, whether it's
curricular stuff?
Curricular-based. So whether it's a section of a textbook, or a specific book, or a specific resource, or a speaker. It could be a wide variety of things that a teacher could then use to meet a given standard. And then we would get professional development on how to use these various tools to meet the standards. So it's pretty wide open. But I will say, there's politics on this. Don't kid yourself. The people that were behind putting it together think it's going to solve all the racial problems of the world, but it's not. It's going to write a new curriculum, an updated curriculum. But the educators that are on it, because there are a number of educators that are either curriculum people themselves, superintendents and things, are doing a share of work that are vetting and are looking at resources and are being pretty upfront and transparent about, well, this is a good resource and this is why, and this is an example of one that's not a good resource and why. So that's been pretty clear in the last 2 meetings. So It's an educational process for me as well, but I'm trying to represent ISB's viewpoint and a balancing viewpoint because the politicians they even came into it and said, well, this is supposed to be a mandated curriculum. This is mandated for everybody. How are we going to know a teacher is going to teach this? And Donna Lee down at ISB said, it's not a mandate. We're not a mandated state. We're a standard state, so you're going to provide resources to meet a standard. So the politicians didn't understand any of that. And they still want to change that, but that's a whole different battle. So they were disappointed, unfortunately. So sorry for them. But we will provide a good, robust curriculum. Ideally, in talking with Chris, it would be much better if they just gave us a full calendar year to go through this process, so we could release it like at the end of next fall. And you would have much more time to pull together and be able to implement it properly and train staff and get professional development lined up. It's the state of Illinois, and we're going to push it on for at least right now. So I'll give you updates as we go through.
I'll just quickly add on the conference. Everybody did a pretty good job of summing it up, but in relationship to that legislative session, that room was packed as well, because I didn't even know Eric was there. I thought it was supposed to be beforehand. So when we're getting lost in a smaller room, that's something to be said. But this session was what Eric said. I would agree with that. But afterwards, I think it prompted a lot of discussion. You go into another session, you're by yourself. It's easy to start talking to other school board members and to be able to hear what are their struggles as a board, what are they facing, what are their opinions, things like that. And even though opinions are from, both sides of the spectrum to I talked to a school board member that was like inner city of Chicago, like worst of the worst neighborhoods, and just her struggle at a board meeting, holding a board meeting, as opposed to, somebody down south in southern Illinois. And it was encouraging to hear, though, that no matter what your viewpoint was, you wanted some type of local control, and that's been something that's been discussed with their board and concerned in their boards. So it's not just necessarily us having that conversation, but that's being had through all ends of the spectrum, is that my community is unique to us. Let us still be able to have some control of what happens here. I thought it was humorous, though, in that session when the gentleman from Vienna, which is like the southern Illinois, and might as well be Kentucky, he kind of just said jokingly, like, basically, what school here, has sent their students home for Deer Day, and you've got the lady next to me that's, from the inner city of Chicago, like, what the heck is Deer Day, But it shows that there are different communities throughout this entire state that want to do certain things, and as that local control starts to evaporate, to what end does that happen to? So I thought it was really, really good from that standpoint. I mean, these conferences, you get what you put into it. So you can strike up those conversations and learn something that way. I thought that was another nice thing about going and being in person and being able to have those conversations with people that I probably would have never talked to in my life, but we're sitting in a room together waiting for a conference to start and there's nothing else to do besides look at our phone, and that's not productive. So we might as well talk about something that we're here to talk about. So I thought that was great, and it's a great opportunity to be able to go and be able to have those conversations as well.
Yeah, perhaps surprisingly, there was really not a lot of discussion about COVID or mask mandates or anything. There really weren't any sessions. I said in one session that was on facilities and how do you imagine facilities in a post-COVID world, but there really wasn't anything that talked about local control or how people are dealing with health crises or anything like that. And I guess I'd throw it out there just as a future agenda item and not something that we're ready to talk about today, but as we look forward to post-Christmas vacation, winter vacation, we will be at the point there where every student inside of our building should have had the opportunity, hopefully, to have been vaccinated. Does that change the board or the district's feeling in a mid-January, late January timeline about mask mandates? And maybe the governor gives us the flexibility to say do whatever you want in your district. Maybe there's a legal case that wins that power or justifies our case from a liability standpoint that way. But I just throw it out there not to have a discussion now, but to put that on our radars for maybe January, just to talk about what the next normal, I guess is the phrase I've been hearing now, what that looks like.
Well, there's a number of cases on both the federal and state level that are making their way through, so we'll see. eventually we get a rule. But hopefully, we act on it before we get a rule from the court. We meaning the state of Oklahoma. Well, thank you for sharing those insights from the conference. It's really good. I'm glad you were able to go and bring that kind of information back today. We'll make sure everybody gets a copy of this, Mike.
Yeah, I'll give you electronic one.
Anything else for open discussion? Future agenda items? Is there a motion to go into executive session for the consideration of matters related to the appointment, employment, compensation, or dismissal of personnel, negotiations, and imminent litigation?
So moved?
Moved and seconded, roll call?
Jones?
Yes.
Massey?
Yep.
Win?
Yeah.
Tyler?
Yes.
Davey? DeVito?
Yes.
Barnhart? Motion carried.
Adjourn briefly for executive session and then return for our meetings. Okay, we're back in open session. Is there a motion to approve the personnel report as presented? Second?
Second.
Moved and seconded, roll call?
Win?
Yeah.
Tyler?
Yes.
Davey? DeVito?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yep.
Barnhart?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Did you get that?
I did,
All
yeah.
right. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.